My daughter's fiancé thought it was hilarious to introduce his backup wife at their engagement party. He laughed, his friends laughed. So I decided to play along. By the time I was done, the only thing he was laughing about was the $750,000 real estate deal that just vanished into thin air. Before we continue, if you understand what it means to build something with your own hands, only to have someone try to take it with a smirk and a joke, then this channel is for you. Subscribe for more stories about protecting what's yours. We post new stories every day. Leave a like and tell us in the comments what you've built that you'd defend at all costs. My name is Robert. For 30 years, I ran a construction company. I didn't build skyscrapers. I built homes. Solid, dependable families. I started with a single truck and a dream, fueled by the memory of my wife, Clara. We lost her to a sudden illness when our daughter, Maya, was only 10. The two of us, we became a team. Every splinter I pulled from her thumb, every burned casserole we laughed over, every tear we shed on Mother's Day. It all went into the foundation of who we were. My business success wasn't for fancy cars. It was for her education, her security, her future. I was building a legacy, not just a portfolio. When Maya brought Damien home for the first time, I saw the way she looked at him. It was the same way she looked at the world when she was a little girl, full of wonder. He was charming, I'll give him that. A digital entrepreneur, he called himself. He had a smoothness to him, a polished confidence that felt rehearsed. He asked about my business, but his questions were always about the bottom line. What's the valuation, Robert? How many rental properties do you own outright? He never once asked how I managed to keep my crew loyal for 20 years, or what it felt like to drive past a neighborhood I'd helped build. I dismissed it as youthful ambition. My job, I thought, was to be happy for my daughter. So when he proposed to her on a sailboat in the San Juan Islands, and she called me, her voice shimmering with joy, I poured myself a whiskey and told her it was the best news I'd ever heard. I promised them a wedding fit for a princess and a down payment on a beautiful home to start their life together. It was everything I had worked for. It was all for her. I had no idea I was funding my own humiliation. The engagement party was at the Grove, a venue Maya had loved since she was a girl, all twinkling lights and ancient oak trees. I remember standing by the stone fountain, watching her. She was radiant, her arm linked through Damien's, accepting congratulations. I felt a swell of pride, pushing my niggling doubts deep down. This was her day. I'd arranged everything. The food, the wine, the band, nothing was too good. I saw Damien's parents, Richard and Lydia, across the lawn. They were nice people, quiet and unassuming. He was a retired school teacher, and she worked at a local library. They seemed almost as dazzled by the spectacle as I was wary of it. Damien, however, was in his element. He held court, telling loud stories that always seemed to position him as the hero. That's when I first saw her, a blonde woman, standing a little apart from the main crowd. She was strikingly pretty, but there was an intensity in her gaze as she watched Damien that felt proprietary, not like a guest, like a stakeholder. I saw Damien catch her eye once and give a slight, almost imperceptible nod. I thought nothing of it at the time, just another friend. I made my way over to Maya, pulling the small velvet box from my pocket. "For you, sweetheart," I said, something old. Inside was my mother's Art Deco diamond bracelet. Maya's eyes welled up with tears as she clasped it around her wrist. "Oh, Dad, it's perfect. Thank you." She hugged me tightly, and for a moment, it was just us again, the way it had always been. But the moment shattered. Damien swooped in, his arm snaking possessively around Maya's waist. "What's this? A little pre-wedding bonus?" he joked, his tone light but his eyes fixed on the bracelet. He didn't ask about its history or sentiment. He just assessed its weight. "Very nice, Robert. Very nice indeed." He then leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Speaking of, I've been crunching some numbers. That down payment you mentioned, if we had access to it before the wedding, we could lock in a killer investment opportunity I've got lined up. Double our money in a year." The air went out of the evening. The music, the laughter, it all faded into a dull roar. He wasn't seeing a family heirloom. He was seeing liquidity. He wasn't seeing a home for his future family. He was seeing capital for his next scheme. I looked at my daughter, her face still glowing, completely unaware of the calculation happening right beside her. And I knew, with a cold, sinking certainty, that the man she was marrying was not the man he pretended to be. The real performance was just about to begin. Have you ever had a moment where a single sentence changed everything? That feeling of the floor dropping out from under you? If you know what that's like, share your story in the comments. Your experience might be the warning someone else needs to hear. The toast was Damien's idea. Of course it was. He commandeered the band's microphone, tapping it with a finger until the gentle jazz music cut off abruptly. All eyes turned to him. He stood there, silhouetted against the setting sun, a picture of arrogant grace. "I just want to say a few words," he began, his voice oozing false modesty. "To my beautiful Maya, the love of my life, the woman who finally said yes to putting up with me." Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. I stood near the back, my arms crossed, a glass of club soda turning warm in my hand. He went on, his speech weaving through clichés about finding his other half. But then the tone shifted. The sweetness began to curdle into boasting. "They say every successful man has a great woman behind him," he declared, puffing out his chest slightly. "And I've certainly hit the jackpot. Beautiful, smart, from an amazing family." He paused, letting his eyes sweep over the guests, a smirk playing on his lips. But a wise man always has a contingency plan. A few of his friends from the corner, a group of slick-haired guys in too tight blazers, chuckled knowingly. My spine straightened. I saw Maya's smile tighten at the edges. Damien raised his glass, not to Maya, but toward the periphery of the crowd. "So, I'd like you all to meet Chloe." He pointed directly at the blonde woman I'd noticed earlier. She blinked, a slow, cat-like smile spreading across her face as every head in the garden swiveled to look at her. "She's my insurance policy, folks," Damien boomed, laughing at his own genius. "My backup wife. You know, in case Maya here ever forgets to put the cap on the toothpaste or something." The silence was absolute for a split second, a vacuum of shock. Then, a forced, ragged wave of laughter broke out. It was the sound of profound discomfort. People glanced at Maya, at me, their eyes wide with second-hand embarrassment. I saw Chloe, the so-called backup, give a little flirtatious wave, basking in the twisted spotlight. My vision tunneled. The expensive champagne, the delicate canapés, the thousands of dollars of twinkling lights, it all melted into a nauseating blur. This wasn't a joke. It was a power play. A public test to see how much disrespect Maya, and by extension I, would swallow. It was a declaration that his loyalty was conditional, and that my daughter was interchangeable. I looked at my little girl. The radiant joy had been completely extinguished from her face, replaced by a pale, stunned humiliation. She was trying to smile, trying to play along, but her eyes were glassy with unshed tears. She was crumbling right in front of me, and the man who had promised to cherish her was the one holding the sledgehammer. A red-hot fury, the kind I hadn't felt in decades, surged through me. It was a physical heat, burning away the last of my doubts. Every instinct screamed to march over there, rip the microphone from his hand, and lay him out with a right hook I'd learned in my youth. But I saw the panic in Maya's eyes, the plea for someone, anyone, to make this stop without making it worse. So I didn't react with fire. I reacted with ice. I picked up my own champagne glass, a pristine, fluted thing, and walked calmly to the center of the lawn. The brittle laughter died again as I approached. I stopped beside Damien, not looking at him, but facing the crowd. I tapped my glass with a fork. The clear, sharp ring cut through the tension like a knife. "What a thoughtful sentiment, Damien," I said, my voice projecting with a calm I did not feel. I turned my head slowly, finally meeting his eyes. His smirk had frozen, unsure of my move. "A contingency plan, a backup. It's so prudent." I let the word hang in the air, letting its true meaning cold, calculating, unromantic sink in. "It reminds me of something I tell my young project managers," I continued, turning back to the guests, a tight, diplomatic smile on my face. "The most important part of any foundation isn't the concrete or the rebar. It's the integrity of the ground beneath it. Build on shaky, dishonest ground, and the most beautiful structure will eventually crack and collapse." I paused, letting my gaze sweep over Damien's friends. "There is no backup for a faulty foundation. I raised my glass, not in a toast, but as a period to the conversation. To Maya, my daughter. The only woman in this garden whose worth is immeasurable and non-negotiable. I didn't wait for a response. I turned, placed my full glass on a passing waiter's tray, and walked straight to my daughter. I didn't look at Damien. I didn't acknowledge Chloe. I simply put my arm around Maya's shoulders and guided her away from the crowd, toward the quiet of the stone path leading to the parking lot. "Dad," she whispered, her body trembling against mine. "I'm so embarrassed." "You have nothing to be embarrassed about," I said, my voice low and firm. "He does, but this isn't the place." Behind us, I heard the party stir back to life, a hushed, awkward buzz. I didn't look back. I had seen all I needed to see. The joke, the woman, the calculated humiliation. It wasn't a misstep. It was a blueprint. And as I helped my daughter into my car, I knew my response couldn't be a simple emotional outburst. It had to be a demolition. There are moments that define a relationship, where a line is crossed and there's no going back. If you've ever had to choose between a fiery reaction and a cold, calculated plan to protect someone you love, you know the weight of that decision. Tell us about that line in the comments. The drive home was silent, thick with a humiliation so profound it had its own weight. Maya stared out the passenger window, the lights of the city streaking across her tear-streaked face. I didn't press her. I just drove, my hands gripping the steering wheel with a force that turned my knuckles white. The image of Damien's smug face, of that woman's pleased smile, was burned onto the back of my eyelids. I walked her to the door of her apartment. She turned to me, her composure finally shattering. "He said it was just a joke, Dad," she sobbed, collapsing against my chest. "He said I was being too sensitive, that his friends all understood his sense of humor." I held her, patting her back, the way I had when she was a little girl, and skinned her knee. But inside, the ice was spreading. This was textbook manipulation. Isolate the victim, make them doubt their own reality. "What did his friends do, honey?" I asked, my voice gentle. "They laughed," she whispered, the words muffled against my jacket. "They all laughed, especially Chloe." She looked proud. That was the final nail. He hadn't just made a bad joke. He had orchestrated a ritual of humiliation, with his girlfriend as a willing participant. I kissed Maya's forehead. "Get some sleep. We'll talk tomorrow. Don't answer his calls tonight." The moment I got home, I didn't pour a drink. I didn't rage. I went to my study, the room that housed the blueprints of my life, and I called Frank. Frank had been my lawyer and friend for 20 years. He'd handled everything from my first business contract to Clara's will. His voice, gravelly with sleep, answered on the fourth ring. "Robert, it's after 11. Everything okay?" "No, Frank," I said, my voice flat and steady. "It's not. I need you to listen." I laid it all out. The financial probing, the backup wife joke, Maya's shattered expression, the woman named Chloe. I spoke without embellishment, laying out the facts like a prosecutor presenting evidence. Frank was silent for a long moment after I finished. I could hear the wheeze of his old desk chair as he leaned back. "People who make jokes about backups," he said finally, his tone now sharp and awake, "are usually cutting corners everywhere. They see people as tools, relationships as transactions. This isn't a boyfriend problem, Robert. This is a liability." "I know," I said. "I can't just tell Maya. She has to see it for herself. She has to believe she discovered it." "Then we need to dig," Frank replied. "We need to give her something undeniable. Let me make some calls. We need to look into Mr. Damien Ford. Everything. His business, his finances, his history with this Chloe woman." I hung up and looked out the dark window. The quiet, suburban street was a stark contrast to the war I had just declared. This wouldn't be fought with shouts, but with spreadsheets. Not with accusations, but with evidence. Damien had chosen to fight a builder on his own turf. He just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I called Maya. Her voice was thick with sleep and the aftermath of tears. "He called 12 times, she said. "He left a dozen messages. He's saying I overreacted, that I made him look like a fool in front of everyone by leaving." The manipulation was so blatant it was almost impressive. He was reframing himself as the victim. What do you think, Maya? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Forget what he's saying. What did you feel when he said it? There was a long pause. I felt small, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I felt like I was a commodity, like he was showing off that he had options. It hurt, Dad. That spark of clarity was all I needed. It was the foundation I would build upon. Your feelings are never wrong, honey. They're information. Listen to them. I spent the day in a state of controlled stillness. I didn't return Damien's calls. I didn't respond to his texts, which escalated from defensive, "Come on, Robert, it was a joke," to vaguely threatening, "We need to talk about the wedding finances. This is affecting our plans." I was letting him dangle, letting his own anxiety and arrogance do the work for me. 2 days later, I was in Frank's office. He introduced me to a woman named Gwen, a private investigator who looked more like a friendly librarian than a sleuth. Gwen specializes in financial and digital forensics, Frank explained. She's a ghost. I laid out our targets: Damien's business, Apex Digital Solutions, and his relationship with Chloe. Gwen nodded, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "I'll start with the public records," she said. "Business filings, liens, court records. Then we'll see what cracks appear." A week passed. Maya was back in Damien's orbit, but I could hear the tension in her voice. She was trying to believe his apologies, but the seed of doubt had been planted. I remained a steady, non-judgmental presence, offering no lectures, only listening. It was the hardest role I'd ever played. Then the email arrived. The subject line: "Preliminary findings. Ford, Damien." My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. Gwen's report was clinical and devastating. Subject's business, Apex Digital Solutions, is heavily leveraged. 2 outstanding business loans totaling $185,000, multiple maxed-out credit lines, tax lien filed by the state last year for unpaid sales tax. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning the words. Regarding personal relationship with Chloe Reed, financial records indicate shared expenses dating back at least 3 years, predating his relationship with Maya. Evidence of a joint bank account, though now inactive. Cell tower data places them together consistently, including overnight stays, during the entirety of his engagement. I read the last line 3 times, the ice in my veins turning to a glacial calm. He wasn't just a fool, he was a fraud, and he had built his house of cards on the assumption that my love for my daughter would make me a willing, blind investor. He was about to learn the cost of miscalculating a man's character. When you discover someone you trusted has been living a double life, the betrayal cuts deeper than any knife. If you've ever uncovered a truth that shattered your world, you know the surreal calm that follows the storm. Share your story of discovery in the comments below. Sitting in the quiet of my study, the damning report glowing on my screen, I felt no rage. The initial, white-hot anger had been refined in the furnace of that humiliation, cooled by the weeks of silence, and hammered into a single, sharp point of purpose. This was no longer about emotion, it was about engineering. Damien had presented a flawed, dangerous design for my daughter's future. My job was to demolish it before the first load-bearing wall was ever put in place. I called Frank. "We have everything we need to go to Maya right now," I said without preamble. "We do," he agreed. "But will she believe it? Or will she see it as her overprotective father trying to break up her relationship? He's already priming her for that, Robert. You said it yourself. He was right. If I handed her this report, Damien would spin it. He'd say I was spying on him, that I was fabricating evidence because I didn't like his sense of humor, that I was a controlling father who couldn't let go. The truth, no matter how stark, could be dismissed if the delivery was clumsy. "So, we don't hand it to her," I said, the plan crystallizing in my mind with terrifying clarity. "We let him hand it to her. We build a stage, Frank. We give him the spotlight, the script, and all the rope he needs, and we let him hang himself in front of her." Frank was silent for a moment. Then a low chuckle came through the phone. "I'm listening. He's desperate for capital, right? His business is a house of cards. He sees me as his ATM. So, let's give him an investment opportunity, something he simply cannot resist." Over the next hour, we crafted the blueprint. Frank would reach out to a former client, a real estate developer named Marcus Thorne, a man of impeccable reputation and discretion, who owed Frank a favor. Marcus would play the part of a developer sitting on a golden opportunity, a parcel of land near a proposed new tech campus, a deal with a guaranteed 100% return in 18 months. The only catch? He needed a quick, silent partner to bridge a financing gap. A $150,000 cash injection was required immediately to secure the deal. "He'll never have that much liquid," I said. "He'll come to me for the down payment gift early. He'll try to use it for this." "Precisely," Frank replied. "And when you, the concerned future father-in-law, insist on meeting this Marcus Thorne to vet the deal for your daughter's financial security, it will seem not only reasonable, but responsible." The trap was set. The bait was irresistible. Now, we just had to dangle it in front of the rat. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, Maya came over for dinner. She was quiet, picking at her food. "Damien's been under a lot of stress," she ventured, not meeting my eyes. "His business, it's a bigger opportunity than he let on. He's on the verge of a huge deal, but he needs capital to secure it. He was wondering, since the wedding is still months away, if we could have that down payment gift now. It would change everything for us." I put my fork down, feigning thoughtful concern. "Maya, that's a significant amount of money. That's for your home, your stability. I'm not just writing a check for a business venture I know nothing about. That's not how I built what I have." Her face fell, and I saw the scripted disappointment Damien had planted there. "However," I continued, leaning forward, "I'm not unreasonable. If this deal is as solid as he says, and it's for your future, I'm willing to listen. But I need to be involved. I need to meet his partner, see the numbers, and vet it myself. My lawyer, Frank, can look over the contracts. If it checks out, then we can talk." The relief that flooded her face was genuine. She saw it as my blessing, my support. She didn't see the jaws of the trap closing around the man she loved. "Oh, Dad, thank you. I'll tell him. He'll be so happy." She called him right there from my dining room. I could hear the elation in his voice through the phone. He'd taken the bait. He was already counting the money. The meeting was set for a week later at the Meridian Club, an exclusive downtown spot where Marcus Thorne was a member. It was the perfect venue, opulent, convincing, and, most importantly, it was the same hotel where, according to Gwen's updated logs, Damien had a standing weekly business dinner with Chloe. The stage was set. The players were in position. All that was left was for the performance to begin. The day of the meeting, I dressed with the same deliberate care as I had for the engagement party. This was another performance, but this time, I was the director. I picked up Maya from her apartment. She was nervous, wringing her hands. "He's so excited, Dad. This means everything to him." "I'm sure it does," I said, my tone even. We walked into the plush, silent lobby of the Meridian Club. Frank was waiting for us, looking every bit the seasoned lawyer in a tailored suit. He gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. Marcus Thorne was already at a private table in the corner, a portfolio of documents laid out before him. He stood and shook our hands, his grip firm, his demeanor the picture of a busy, successful man doing a favor for an old friend. Damien arrived 5 minutes late, flushed and slightly out of breath. His eyes were wide, taking in the opulence. He shook Marcus's hand with a little too much enthusiasm. "Mr. Thorne, it's an honor. I've heard incredible things about your developments." "Let's get down to business," Marcus said, his voice all efficiency. He opened the portfolio, showing glossy renderings of a modern apartment complex. "The tech campus is a done deal. The land value here," he said, tapping the map, "will triple within 18 months. My partner had a heart attack, God bless him, so I need a quick, silent injection to secure the parcel, $150,000. Your return will be double that, guaranteed." I watched Damien's face. I saw the naked greed in his eyes, the desperation. He was already mentally spending the profit. "The numbers are solid, Robert," Frank said, pretending to review a financial summary. "The land appraisal is here. The campus blueprints are public record. It's a rare opportunity." Damien could barely contain himself. "This is it. This is the break I've been waiting for." He turned to me, his expression one of practiced sincerity. "Robert, with your help, we can secure this. This isn't just for me, it's for Maya, for our future." I steepled my fingers, letting the silence stretch. I looked from Damien to Maya, then back to the documents. It does look promising, I said slowly. But a deal this good, I'd feel better if we had a second opinion on the land survey. Frank, do you have that contact at the city planning office? What was his name? It was a deliberate stall, a pointless question. But it worked. Damien's phone, sitting on the table, lit up with a text message. The preview was visible to all of us. Chloe, heart emoji. Our usual room? 645. I'm already here. The world stopped. Maya's sharp intake of breath was the only sound. She stared at the phone, then at Damien's horrified face. The color drained from her cheeks. What is that? She whispered, her voice trembling. Damien snatched the phone, fumbling. It's nothing. A wrong number. A spam text. It was a pathetic, impossible lie. The room number was specific. The heart emoji was damning. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, my expression one of cold disappointment. Frank and Marcus maintained a perfect, stunned silence. Our usual room. Maya's voice rose, cracking with a pain that physically hurt to hear. Damien? Who is that? Is that Chloe? The facade crumbled. Under the pressure of being caught, his panic turned to anger. A classic tactic. Are you spying on me? He snarled. First at Maya, then at me. This is a setup. This whole thing. You brought me here to ambush me. I brought you here to invest in your future, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You brought yourself here to meet your mistress. The truth, stated so plainly, hung in the air between us. Damien was cornered, and a cornered animal is at its most dangerous and most truthful. You think you're so smart? He spat at me, his face contorted with rage. He turned to Maya. And you're so naive. You think your daddy's money is the key to everything? I needed that down payment to save my company. This deal was my way out. But you and your sensitive little feelings almost ruined it with that stupid banner joke. There it was. The final, ugly truth. He admitted it wasn't a joke. He admitted he was using her. He admitted everything. Maya made a small, broken sound. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. She looked at Damien, then at me, her eyes filled with a devastating clarity. Without a word, she turned and walked away, her steps slow and unsteady. Damien stared after her, then back at the now useless documents on the table. He had lost everything in the span of 60 seconds. His investor, his fiancé, and his carefully constructed lie. The Trojan horse had been wheeled inside his gates, and it had destroyed him from within. I stood, looking down at the ruin of the man I had once hoped would be my son-in-law. The meeting is over, I said. I believe you know the way out. There is a unique, hollow silence that follows the shattering of a lie when the person you trusted most is unmasked as a stranger. If you have ever faced that moment of brutal, painful truth, you know the courage it takes to walk away. Share your story of finding the strength to leave in the comments below. I found Maya in the lobby, collapsed on a velvet settee, her body shaking with silent, violent sobs. The opulent surroundings, the crystal chandeliers, the marble floors seemed to mock her private agony. I didn't try to offer empty words. I simply sat beside her, placed a firm hand on her back, and let the storm pass through her. There was a strange, hollow peace in the aftermath of the explosion. The waiting was over. The truth was no longer a specter. It was a fact, ugly and definitive. After a few minutes, the sobs subsided into ragged breaths. She looked up at me, her makeup smeared into a tragic mask. He never loved me, did he? She whispered, the question hanging in the air between us. I can't speak to what he felt, I said, choosing my words with the care of a bomb disposal expert. But I can speak to his actions. His actions showed he loved what you represented. Access, stability, a financial lifeline. That is not the same thing. She nodded slowly, the truth of it settling into her bones. The confusion was gone, replaced by a weary, clear-eyed grief. The wedding, the condo, are handled, I said, my voice firm. You don't need to think about that right now. Your only job is to breathe. I guided her to my car and drove her to my house. not her apartment where Damien's ghost would linger in every corner. I made her tea, tucked a blanket around her, and let the quiet of the home she grew up in wrap around her. Once she finally fell into a fitful sleep on the couch, I retreated to my study. The time for comfort was over. The time for action was now. Frank was on the phone before I even dialed. "I heard," he said. "Marcus said it was a textbook meltdown." "How's Maya?" "Shattered, but she'll survive," I replied, my gaze fixed on the city lights outside my window. "Now, we make sure Damien doesn't." "What's the first move?" "The money," Frank said without hesitation. "He's desperate and cornered. He'll try to access anything he can. We freeze everything." Now, my first call was to Albert, my financial manager. I instructed him to immediately and permanently remove Maya as a beneficiary from my life insurance policy, my investment accounts, and my pension. In her place, I designated a local women's shelter and a scholarship fund for aspiring female architects in Clara's name. Next, I called the bank and placed a formal hold on the dedicated account holding the $150,000 down payment gift, citing potential fraud. Then, Frank and I turned to the wedding. We spent the next 2 hours on a conference call with the venue manager, the caterer, and the florist. We cited irreconcilable family circumstances and invoked the force majeure clauses in the contracts. It was a brutal, financial bloodletting. We managed to recover 60 cents on the dollar, but the loss of the remaining 40% was a cheap price to pay for freedom. Every canceled contract was another thread cut from the puppet strings Damien had tried to tie to my daughter. It was nearing midnight when my home phone rang, the landline I kept for emergencies. I knew who it was before I picked it up. "Robert, you son of a bitch." Damien's voice was slurred, raging. "You ruined me. You think you can just cut me off? I'll sue you. I'll tell everyone what you did." I let him scream himself hoarse. When he paused for breath, I spoke, my voice low and steady. "You are welcome to try, Damien. But before you do, I would advise you to check your business email. My lawyer just sent you something you might find enlightening." I hung up. The email Frank had sent contained a carefully curated selection of Gwen's findings, the tax lien, the maxed-out credit lines, the evidence of his financial malfeasance. It was a warning shot, a reminder that while he might try to sling mud about a broken engagement, we held the keys to his professional annihilation. I walked back into the living room. Maya was still asleep, her face finally peaceful. I looked at her, and I felt the cold resolve harden within me. The perimeter was secure. The first phase was complete. Now, it was time to dismantle his life, piece by piece. The following days were a whirlwind of quiet, purposeful activity. My study became a command center. Frank and I worked in tandem, a well-rehearsed demolition crew. The next target was the condo. The purchase was already in motion, but the final paperwork and fund transfer were still pending. I met with the real estate agent, a stern woman named Brenda, who had seen every kind of family drama unfold in a transaction. "I need to restructure the purchase," I told her, spreading the new documents Frank had prepared across her desk. "Sole ownership. Just my daughter, Maya. Remove Damien Ford from all documents, effective immediately." Brenda scanned the addendum, her expression unreadable. "This is highly unusual, Mr. Evans. The loan pre-approval was based on their combined income. The loan is no longer necessary," I said calmly. "I'll be purchasing the property outright, cash." She looked up, her professional composure cracking for a fraction of a second. This was not part of the script. "I see. That certainly simplifies things. I'll need Mr. Ford to sign a release." "He will," I said, though I had no intention of asking him. Frank had already drafted a letter to be sent from his firm, stating that unless Damien voluntarily signed the release by 5 p.m. the next day, we would file a lawsuit against him and Apex Digital Solutions for fraudulent inducement, based on the evidence of his affair and his intention to use marital assets for personal debt. It was a nuclear option, but we knew he was too cowardly to face it. He signed. The scanned document arrived in Frank's inbox with no comment. Another wall of his future had been torn down. Meanwhile, Maya began the painful process of disentanglement. From the safety of my home, she changed her phone number. With my support, she drafted a short, firm email to Damien, copied to Frank, stating that their relationship was over, demanding no further contact, and that any communication should go through her attorney. She packed a single suitcase and, with a friend for moral support, went to her apartment while Damien was at his office, collecting her most important belongings. She left the Art Deco bracelet and the engagement ring on the kitchen counter, a final, silent verdict. She returned, her face pale but determined. "It's done," she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in weeks. She then looked at me, her eyes full of a new, grim understanding. "Dad." The backup wife joke. That was him testing the waters, wasn't it? Seeing if he could be that brazen, to see what he could get away with. "Yes," I said simply. "It was a stress test on your boundaries. And when you didn't collapse them entirely," he escalated. She nodded, absorbing the lesson. It was a brutal education in the nature of manipulation, but it was one that would protect her for the rest of her life. The final act of securing the perimeter was the most symbolic. I visited Mr. Henderson, the family notary, a man who had witnessed my will after Clara died and Maya's first college savings bond. His office smelled of old paper and lemon polish, a scent of permanence. "Andrew," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "The will update for Maya's wedding?" B. A new one, actually," I said, sliding the document Frank had prepared across his desk. "I am revoking all previous versions. My entire estate, the business, the properties, all assets are to be placed in a protected trust. Maya is the beneficiary, but she cannot access the principal until she is 40, and the trust is insulated from any future spouses or creditors." Mr. Henderson read through the clauses, his lips moving silently. He looked up, his eyes wise and sad. "This is a fortress, Andrew." "It needs to be," I replied. "I'm not just leaving her wealth. I'm leaving her a legacy that can't be plundered by a charming man with an empty wallet and a backup plan." He nodded slowly and summoned his assistants to witness me sign. The scratch of the pen was the sound of a vault door sliding shut. The perimeter was now sealed, legally and financially. That evening, I stood on my terrace with Maya. We didn't speak. We just watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. The war wasn't over, there would be fallout, tantrums from Damien, gossip from acquaintances, but the battlefield was secure. My daughter was safe under my roof, and the future I had built for her was no longer in the hands of a con man. The cost had been immense, a dream, a trust, a heart. But as I looked at Maya, standing a little taller in the evening light, I knew the foundation we were on now, though born of pain, was made of solid, unshakable ground. Building a fortress around a loved one's heart after it's been broken is the ultimate act of protection. It's not about shutting the world out, but about ensuring the next person who gets in is worthy of the treasure inside. If you've ever had to rebuild someone's walls after a siege, share your story below. Your experience might be the blueprint someone else needs. The silence that followed the storm was its own strange entity. For weeks, our lives had been a maelstrom of legal calls, emotional turmoil, and strategic strikes. Now, there was only the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the soft click of Maya's laptop as she worked from my home office. She had taken a leave of absence from her architecture firm, a necessary retreat to heal. The world outside, however, had not stopped turning, and the consequences of Damien's unraveling began to ripple outward. The first ripple came in the form of a bankruptcy notice. Frank, who monitored Damien's business filings, forwarded it to me with a single, succinct comment: "The dominoes are falling." Without the prospect of my money to bail him out, and with the legal threat from us hanging over his head, Apex Digital Solutions had collapsed. The loans were called in. The tax lien was enforced. Damien was personally liable for a significant portion of the debt. The digital entrepreneur was now a bankrupt man, his credit rating shattered for the foreseeable future. Maya showed little reaction when I told her. She simply nodded, her focus on the architectural rendering on her screen. "A faulty foundation," she murmured, echoing my words from the engagement party. It collapsed. The second ripple was more personal. Lydia, Damien's mother, called me. Her voice was strained, thick with a shame that was palpable even over the phone. "Robert, I don't even know what to say. We are so terribly, terribly sorry. We had no idea. We thought the world of Maya." I know you did, Lydia, I said, my tone softer than it would have been for her son. This isn't on you or Richard. He's not well, she confessed, her voice dropping to a whisper. He's blaming everyone but himself. He's saying you destroyed him out of spite. I protected my daughter. I corrected her gently but firmly. He destroyed himself the moment he decided to build a life on a lie. My only role was to point out the cracks before the whole structure fell on top of my child. She wept then, quiet, helpless sobs. I felt a pang of sympathy for her. She had lost the son she thought she had, just as Maya had lost the future she thought was real. But the most telling ripple was the one involving Chloe. According to a final update from Gwen, the backup wife had seen the bankruptcy filing and promptly vanished. She cleaned out their joint storage unit, the one she and Damien had kept, another detail we'd uncovered, and deleted all her social media accounts. She had been a partner in prosperity, a participant in the deception, but she had no interest in being a passenger on a sinking ship. The irony was perfect. The woman he had paraded as his insurance had filed her own claim and abandoned the policy. A month after the meeting at the Meridian Club, Maya approached me one evening. She looked more like herself, clear-eyed, her posture straight. "I'm ready to see the condo," she said. "The real one. My one." We drove there in silence. It was a modern, low-rise building in a neighborhood of established trees and quiet streets. It wasn't the extravagant penthouse Damien had been eyeing. It was a 2-bedroom corner unit on the 3rd floor, filled with light. The keys felt heavy in her hand. She walked through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. She stopped in the living room, by the large window that looked out onto a small park. "It's solid," she said, more to herself than to me. "It's honest. It's yours," I replied. "No strings, no debt, just yours." She turned to me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw a genuine, albeit weary, smile. "Thank you, Dad. Not for the condo. For seeing what I couldn't. For being the wall he couldn't knock down." It was in that moment I knew she would be all right. The healing was beginning. She was no longer a victim of his narrative. She was the author of her own again. But Damien, it seemed, was not yet done writing his final, desperate chapter. The confrontation came on a rain-swept Tuesday evening. Maya had just moved the first boxes into her new condo. I was helping her assemble a bookshelf when the intercom from the building's lobby buzzed. She walked over, pressed the button. "Yes?" "Ren." The voice that crackled through the speaker was ragged, stripped of its former polish. "Maya, it's me. We need to talk." It was Damien. I saw her back stiffen. She looked at me, her eyes wide for a second. Then they narrowed with a resolve that made my chest swell with pride. She pressed the talk button again. "There's nothing to talk about, Damien. Leave. Please. 5 minutes. I'm drowning out here." His voice was desperate, whining. "You don't understand what your father has done to me." I moved to stand, ready to be the shield, but Maya held up a hand, a silent, firm command to stay. She took a deep breath and spoke into the intercom, her voice cold and clear. "What my father did was protect me from you. You did this to yourself. Now, leave, or I will call the police." There was a moment of static-filled silence, then a sudden, violent bang as he apparently slammed his fist against the intercom panel. "You bitch!" he screamed, the sound distorted and monstrous. "You and your rich daddy, you think you're so much better? I loved you." That was her breaking point. The last vestige of fear vanished from her face, replaced by pure, cold fury. She stabbed the talk button. "You loved me? You had a girlfriend the entire time. You were using me for my father's money. You humiliated me in front of everyone we know. That isn't love, Damien. That's a transaction. And the deal is off." She released the button, cutting off his incoherent shouting. Her hands were trembling, but her expression was one of fierce triumph. She had faced the monster at the gate and had not flinched. We listened as his shouts faded, replaced by the sound of the main lobby door slamming shut. The threat was over. He had shown her the very worst of himself, and she had seen him for what he was, a pathetic, broken bully. In the quiet that followed, she turned to me. "He's gone." "I know," I said. and you handled it perfectly." She looked around the sparse, half-unpacked condo, at the boxes filled with the pieces of her old life, ready to be reassembled into something new. "This is my fresh start," she said, her voice soft but sure. "No one's backup plan, the primary, the only." I nodded, the truth of her words settling deep within me. The revenge I had meticulously planned, the financial ruin, the public humiliation was complete. But it was this moment, watching my daughter reclaim her power and her voice, that felt like the true victory. I hadn't just broken Damien. I had helped rebuild Maya. A week later, the final piece of the past was formally severed. Maya's divorce papers arrived in the mail, signed by a judge. It was a no-fault, uncontested dissolution. There were no assets to fight over. Damien, through his own lawyer, had not objected. He had nothing left to fight with. That night, Maya and I had a quiet dinner at her new place. She cooked, a simple pasta dish, and we ate at a small card table, the only furniture in her living room. We toasted with cheap wine in paper cups. "To new foundations," she said, clinking her cup against mine. "To the architect," I replied. As I drove home, I felt a sense of closure so profound it was almost spiritual. The anger was gone. The need for further retribution had evaporated. Damien was a ghost, banished to the periphery of our lives, destined to be nothing more than a cautionary tale. Maya would one day, when the pain was a distant memory, tell to a friend in need. The reckoning was over. The balance had been restored. My daughter was safe. She was strong, and she was free. And I, a 62-year-old man who had thought his life's great work was behind him, had just completed the most important project of my career. Not a building, but a rebirth. There is a unique, hollow silence that follows the shattering of a lie when the person you trusted most is unmasked as a stranger. If you have ever faced that moment of brutal, painful truth, you know the courage it takes to walk away. Share your story of finding the strength to leave in the comments below. 6 months. It was a line in the sand, a measurement of time that felt both impossibly long and startlingly short. The man I was 6 months ago, the one who stood frozen under a banner of his own humiliation, felt like a character from a story I'd once read, not a version of myself I had lived. That man operated from a place of reaction, of wounded love. The man I was now acted from a place of purpose. My life had taken on a new, quieter rhythm. Mornings were no longer for worrying about Maya's future, but for enjoying my own. I joined a life drawing class at the community center. My clumsy lines on the page a testament to doing something purely for the joy of it, without the pressure of perfection. 3 afternoons a week, I volunteered at a local nonprofit that helped young entrepreneurs. Teaching them about business plans and profit margins, I felt a sense of contribution that went beyond the transactional nature of writing a check. I was investing time, not just capital. Maya, in turn, had become the architect of her own life in the most literal sense. She had thrown herself into her work, earning a lead role on a significant downtown restoration project. Her new condo was no longer an empty space, but a reflection of her filled with books, bold art, and the smell of fresh coffee. She was dating, cautiously, a structural engineer she'd met on the project who, according to her, actually listens when I talk about load-bearing walls. The joke was a small thing, but it was a sign that the wound was healing, that she could look at the past without flinching. One evening in early spring, she came over for dinner. We sat on the terrace, the air sweet with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. She swirled the wine in her glass, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I heard from Lydia a few days ago," she said, her voice neutral. I looked at her, surprised. "Oh?" She reached out on LinkedIn, just to say she hopes I'm well. She told me. Damien moved back in with them. Maya took a sip of wine. "He's working as a delivery driver for a food app. He's apparently telling anyone who will listen that he was the victim of a conspiracy by a bitter old man who couldn't stand to see him succeed." I let out a short, dry laugh. It held no anger, only a distant pity. "The story he tells himself is the only asset he has left." "It's sad," Maya said, and she meant it. Not sad for her, but sad for him. He had so much potential. He was smart, charismatic. He could have built something real, but he wanted the finished building without pouring the foundation. Her words were a perfect echo of my own philosophy, but they were hers now, earned through her own pain. She had not just survived the collapse, she had learned the principles of construction from it. "Do you ever regret it, Dad?" she asked, turning to me. "The plan? The ruthlessness of it?" I didn't need to think about my answer. "No, I regret that it was necessary. I regret the pain you went through. But I do not regret a single action I took to remove a toxic, dangerous element from your life. Love isn't always soft, Maya. Sometimes, it's the wrecking ball that clears the way for something better." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "It was. Thank you." In that moment, I felt a closure so complete, it was almost spiritual. The quest for vengeance, the need for retribution, had long since evaporated, replaced by this. A daughter, whole and strong, sitting beside me in the peaceful twilight. This was the only payoff that ever mattered. The following week, I received a package. It was from Marcus Thorne, the developer who had played his part so perfectly. Inside was a bottle of exceptionally fine scotch and a handwritten note. "Robert, I heard through the grapevine that the situation resolved as needed. A clean demolition is sometimes the kindest cut. I've had to perform a few myself. This business isn't just about building, it's about knowing what to tear down. Enjoy the drink. You earned it. Marcus." I poured 2 fingers into a glass that evening, the amber liquid catching the light. I didn't drink to Damien's downfall. I drank to the clarity that had come from the chaos. I drank to the unshakable truth that protecting your own dignity is not a sin, but a sacred duty. The past was a closed site. The future was a blank blueprint, and for the first time in decades, I was excited to see what I would draw on it. The following Sunday, I found myself standing in front of the warehouse that housed my construction business. I hadn't been there in months, having left the day-to-day operations in the capable hands of my foreman, Carlos. The giant roll-up door was open, and the familiar scent of sawdust, diesel, and fresh concrete washed over me. It was the smell of my life's work. Carlos looked up from a blueprint, his face breaking into a wide smile. "Chefe, you're a ghost these days. We thought you'd retired to Italy." "Just a long sabbatical, Carlos," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. "How's the crew?" "Good, good. We miss you, though. No one tells stories about the old days like you do." I walked through the bustling space, nodding at the familiar faces of men and women I'd worked with for decades. They saw me not as a bank account, but as a builder. They respected my judgment, my fairness, my hands that still knew how to hold a hammer. This was my world. Solid and real. I ended up in my old office, the walls still covered in framed photos of projects we'd completed: libraries, community centers, homes. There was one of Maya, aged 7, wearing a tiny hard hat and sitting on my lap in the cab of a bulldozer. I looked at that picture for a long time. The love in that little girl's eyes was pure, uncomplicated. The journey to reclaim a version of that trust had been the hardest project of my life. But we had done it. Not by pretending the damage never happened, but by repairing it with honesty and reinforced boundaries. The relationship I had with my daughter now was different. It was sturdier. We were 2 adults who had been through a fire together and emerged, not unscathed, but tempered, stronger. I realized then that my revenge was never truly about Damien. It was about reclaiming the narrative of our lives. We had ripped up his script and written our own. His punishment wasn't the bankruptcy or the humiliation. It was his irreversible irrelevance to our future. On the drive home, I made a decision. I called Frank. "I want to set up a scholarship," I told him. "The Clara Evans Foundation for Single Parents. I want to help people who are trying to build a legacy with their own hands, against the odds." Frank, ever pragmatic, simply said, "I'll draw up the papers. It's a good use of the money, Robert, a lasting one." That evening, I sat on my terrace with the paperwork for the foundation. The ocean, a dark, murmuring presence beyond the dunes. I thought about the $120,000 wedding, the $450,000 condo, the immense financial and emotional cost of it all. The numbers that once represented a sacrifice now felt like the price of admission to a life I was finally meant to live, a life where my worth was not tied to my wallet, but to my wisdom. A life where my daughter loved me for my character, not my capital. The silk vengeance, the stories of vengeance. They serve a purpose. They are catharsis for the betrayed, a warning to the manipulators, and a reminder that dignity is a hill worth dying on. But the true victory isn't in the ruin you leave behind. It's in the peace you build afterward. My story ends here, not with an explosion, but with a quiet exhale. I am Robert Evans. I am a father, a builder, and a man who finally learned that the most important structure you will ever raise is the boundaries around your own soul. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to tear down something toxic to make room for something true, then hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments what you had to demolish in your own life to find your peace. Your story might be the blueprint that helps someone else rebuild. For Silk Vengeance Stories, this is Robert, signing off. True strength isn't about how much you can endure, but about what you have the courage to tear down and rebuild. If this story inspired you to fortify your own boundaries, show your support by liking, subscribing, and sharing your own story of renewal in the comments. Your voice could be the foundation for someone else's freedom.